So Jonni transitioned with estrogen. He developed breasts and a feminized body. He began to detransition in 2024. He has testified that he will never get his true body back, will never experience what it means to be an unmedicalized gay man, and likely never will have a normal sexual relationship, all because of the estrogen. Jonni was not one of the original petitioners in the U.S. v. Skermeti decision, but he added an appendix to it. He has made good use of his ordeal by talking about it publicly, including before the California legislature. He has recently become an ambassador for GenSpect, an international organization founded by Stella O'Malley, which is opposed to medical interventions on children. And here are a few pictures of him as an adult.
That was at the Albuquerque conference last September, Live Not by Lies, hosted by GenSpect.
Live Not by Lies, okay.
Mm-hmm. That was me when I was 20, actually.
Just in a really?
So that really shows you the effects of these interventions.
I see that.
I literally had not matured. You can kind of see in that photo I have gynecomastia. It's not as obvious because I wasn't like wearing like a bra or anything then. I become very anti those at a certain point in my transition.
And then here's you.
Yeah, that was me giving testimony with my mom.
That was in California?
No, that was actually for a Michigan legislature.
Okay.
That was, I believe that was for the Michigan Subcommittee for Child Welfare. It was it was a hearing attempting to get a subpoena to the hospital that had medicalized me. And yeah, so my mom, we weren't able to make it in person that day. So we testified over Zoom and it ended up being,
So you sent me earlier a checklist that you filled out when you were first going to clinicians about transitioning. Is that right?
Yes, and I filled that out in my very first appointment with the gender therapist on May 12th of 2016.
Okay.
And I filled that out after her talk with me. So I went in there and I went in to speak to her first, and my mom was in the waiting room. And then when we came out and switched and my mom went to the back, I had to fill out this checklist essentially.
And so it asks, one of the questions, it's got this agree completely, agree somewhat, neutral, disagree somewhat, disagree completely. Yeah. And the first proposition that you had to respond to was, my life would be meaningless if I would have to live as a boy. Mm-hmm. And you checked yes on that. And yes. Of course, we know that you're not going there without any sort of thought at all about what you want in the future. And how else are you going to answer the question?
Exactly.
It's not a good question. It's a bad question to me from the get-go. It's not something I would ask somebody that I was trying to get at their story.
Yeah, a lot of these questions were very leading questions.
The title of the questionnaire is the Utrecht Gender Dysphoria Scale, Male to Female, Adolescent Version.
Yes.
Yeah, I wish I could put it in front, but I don't think anybody can.
I mean, even
it's
still.
Backwards even.
Yeah.
I'll try to get it in the finished product, or at least have a link in the show notes. And some of the other, or maybe can you read it better than I can?
I can read the questions if you'd like. Because I always do it on my phone so that I can zoom in and zoom out. Because it's kind of hard to see, even in the scanned in version of my medical records. So I had to take a screenshot of the picture in my records so I could zoom in. But yes, so the first question is, my life would be meaningless if I were to live as a boy. And, of course, this is a bad question because it was a very leading question. All it sort of did was reinforce these very negative ideas I was being, and I will say I was being fed some of these ideas, even though I was unhappy with my social role as like I guess what we would stereotypically think a boy's like social role would be, and like, you know, like rule America. Um, so I wasn't happy in that role, but then this therapist had, as I've discussed when I've discussed my story in the past, fed reinforced and fed me, almost exacerbated my concerns over what my future would look like if I were to mature as a male. Give us just 1 second for people that have showed up. We are having some technical difficulties, so we appreciate your patience in the meantime.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. That's so weird.
Yeah, I had to leave the studio.
Huh. Well, just don't mute anymore.
No, I didn't. I didn't do anything.
Oh, weird.
It's
Huh.
so weird. I was just looking, you know, to see. No, it was nothing was muted.
I will say, I don't know what it is, but in this space, whenever like we try to have like a productive conversation, I've joked about this with some people that I've worked with on like advocacy that I've done, we feel like we like draw this kind of like bad juju almost. Like there's some kind of force out there doesn't want us talking.
Well, you sure are good humored about this, and I really don't need to say anything. You can just take it away.
Well, and I wanted to leave some room because I'm not sure like if you want to respond to like anything that I bring up and, you know, things like that. Like, I want to be able to have like somewhat of a back and forth, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, the first question
about your intake questionnaire when you was your first appointment.
Yes.
And you were 13 years old. Mm-hmm. And the questions are quite leading. I think what I did was I went to my phone to open up. And why would that cause?
I don't know.
Whatever. We need to quit talking about it and just move on.
Yeah, it's no big deal.
Okay, so some of the other questions, they're like, go ahead.
Yeah, so the first question was, my life would be meaningless if I would have to live as a boy, of which of course I checked completely agree, because as I had said when we were having our audio difficulties, I was like, you know, that all that question did was really reinforce this preconceived notion I had that I would have so much extreme difficulty as a grown man. Also, it's just a badly written question for like any kind of psychiatrist to give out, because if you feel like your life would be meaningless as a boy, like, well, what does that mean? Like meaningless is such like a general term. I feel like that should have been delved into and not just affirmed and like, well, yeah, it would be meaningless, but it's okay because we're going to help you. And that was very much well, it's not just that was like the vibe that they were giving. That was like literally the kind of language that they were using.
Yeah. Well, when you ask a child, are you happy or unhappy? You know, and that, I mean, that's just a bad question, you know?
Yeah.
Do you think mommy loves you?
It's like, well, I've never had to question it until you bring it up.
It never occurred to me to wonder if mommy loves me. Well, now that she's brought it up.
Yeah. Well, and I did already have these concerns over what my long term would look like, because I already had exposure to people who were like, I guess online were like older feminine gay men that did talk about having difficulties, and then those difficulties, according to them and their experience, and I won't speak on anyone else's experience, I just speak from my own experience, but according to them on their own experience, these difficulties faded into the background when they started transitioning, because like they had an easier time dating, according to them. They didn't get picked on so much. They could just express themselves and blend in. A huge part of like, when I at least got caught up in this, a huge part of it was all about blending in and being normal. They call that passing. That was like the terminology that like my doctors would use and that the community would use. It was all about passing and not being visible.
Yeah.
But anyways, I could go on forever about that. Let me go into the other questions. And then if you have any questions while I'm going along or want to interject with anything, please feel free to.
Okay.
So question 2 was, every time someone treats me like a boy, I feel hurt. And I checked off disagree somewhat because, you know, there were times where like I had a lifelong dislike of rough and tumble play and like sports and things of that nature that I guess are kind of stereotypical, but they were like, at least in my upbringing, considered like stereotypically male. So it was like I had a lot of people pushing me towards those things, and I didn't like that, and people would get very aggravated about it. So with this question, that was like kind of along the lines of what I was thinking about, like, oh, treats me like a boy. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means wearing, you know, like these boring clothes that I don't like to wear, you know, like basic jeans and a blue tee and stuff like that. Or it would be like having to act tough or like stereotypic. It was all about stereotypes, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. It's same thing with the third question. I feel unhappy if someone calls me a boy, and I checked off the same thing. You know, agree somewhat because I was already getting into this idea where like, well, maybe it would be better for me to just transition because I could live a normal life. That was what my therapist and I shouldn't call her my therapist because this was really the only therapy appointment I had with her. But that
And
was
to me too. It was not lost on you that people, if they would refer to you as a boy, it might be in a disparaging way. Like, why are you acting this way? Why do you want to wear these clothes? You're a boy. You're a boy. You're not, you know, and that's not lost on you.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That was very much what it was like, which when I had begun, and I'm going to use the term ideating as trans. I know I know some people get very, you know, touchy around terminology, but for me, that would be an accurate description of my experience when I started ideating, you know, a transition, I guess. It was all about blending in such a way where I could be myself and not have to face these like negative stereotypes I face from people, which of course then not everyone in my environment, but some people in my environment, when they saw me wanting to express myself in a more feminine way, would then go out of their way even more so to refer to me in a disparaging way as like a male, which then just reinforced this idea that, well, I got to double down on this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's a very complicated process of like reinforcement that happens there.
And you would think someone who's an adolescent gender therapist would know that.
Yeah. And I've like
account.
found her website and everything. It seems like, because I didn't know much about this therapist at the time, other than she worked for like this massive hospital chain. You know, this is the most prestigious children's hospital in my state. But on her website, that's like her specialty is giving referral letters for like hormones and surgery. And it seems like she started with adults and then went to adolescents and children. At least that's what it says on her website. So it seems like this seems to be her specialty is giving these letters.
Letters. Yeah. I mean, even to put it on your website, I mean, what is that about? That to me, it says you've got a conclusion you've reached before you even meet the client.
Yeah.
And you know which way to go. And you know what? I guess they get paid per letter.
Well, I don't think that they're supposed to. I'm pretty sure that if that was the case, I think that would be considered. And I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so this is just me speaking like what I believe this would equate to. I believe that if they got paid per letter, that would equate to like a kickback, which is illegal
Okay.
in this kind of profession. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's solely that or if it's just, you know, I could speculate for days over their motivations.
Yeah.
But I do know that this person puts it out there as her specialty to give these referrals.
Yeah.
Anywhom, so that was the third question. I feel unhappy if someone calls me a boy. Number 4 is I feel unhappy because I have a male body. And with this one, I had checked off initially, agree somewhat. And then I crossed it off and changed my answer to agree completely. And that was because, you know, I must have been a late bloomer because I've gotten into scuffles with people in the past over like how far along I should have been in male puberty. And I was not very far. And we'll get into that as we get further down in the checklist. I was still very, very, like I was an adolescent, but I wasn't displaying a lot of like the typical, you know, changes yet. So with this, I felt fearful over again what my future would look like, my development, you know, what role my development would play in that, because I was already following people online that were transitioned as children, like Jazz Jennings, who I still follow, and I don't want me bringing her up. I don't, you know, whenever I bring up some of these people leave like mean comments, and I hate that, you know.
We don't need any mean comments about it.
You know, like, because that person was so young, like, leave that one alone.
Real.
But,
Yeah.
you know, like people like Jazz Jennings who were transitioned very young, and they had this fear about, well, if I start showing these masculine features, then, you know, this, and this will happen. Like, I'll be clocked more, and that could equate to me having a harder life and ultimately more miserable life, and that would drive me closer to suicide. And then this was something that this therapist had also echoed, you know, and elaborated on with my own fears about, you know, as you had said in the intro, like how I would fit in the gay world, which I already had complicated feelings about from, you know, growing up Christian, and the sort of Christian, because I know now there are some people that are more open. But that was
I don't think we've addressed the fact yet that you are in a very rural, small town
yes,
area, and in a very, I mean, would you say evangelical Christian or very conservative Christian environment?
definitely conservative. It was a complex mix because my mom took me to a non-denominational church growing up, but it had influences of like very conservative Baptist and like Lutheran. And then as we started branching out a little bit beyond just the one red light town that I was growing up in, I went to a Lutheran private school for like 5th up through 7th grade when I started my transition. And it was very small. Like my class was 5th through 8th grade, and there were 12 of us like in total. You know, like 5th grade was me and a few other girls. And it was just like one class. But it was, yeah, I mean, it was a very homophobic area in general because my hometown was a one red light town as well, out in rural Michigan. So even the members of my family that aren't particularly religious still had that homophobia just from growing up out in a small town. You know, many of them came of age in the 1970s and 1980s. So that same kind of mindset, you know, that people, I guess, in larger cities have kind of watched dissipate from the more urbanized areas. It still exists out in, you know, rural small towns. It just kind of, you know, it hasn't had time to really change that much yet. Which I believe
you were still very young. You were still 13, 14.
13, yeah.
13 around, and well, 13 when you started to transition.
Medically, yeah. Well, medically and socially, I was exposed to these ideas, I would say probably about 12. is when I
That's
first
because
remember.
even though you're in a very rural, small town area, you have access to the internet.
Yeah, the internet and television.
And television, yeah.
Like
I mean,
these
that's where
ideas.
Jazz Jennings, their reality show is on TV.
Yeah, that was on TLC. And then one of my favorite TV series is American Horror Story had season 5 in 2015, which featured a transgender character. And the whole thing of, falling in love with a man, but not being gay was like a huge part of this character.
Yeah.
So that, there were small influences like that I wouldn't say completely like planted the seed in my mind. Like, I'm not saying that like American
Yeah.
Horror Story brainwashed me or anything.
Right.
But it was just these small encounters with this idea over time in combination with growing up in a background that was very hostile to like homosexuality or effeminacy in males. That combination really kind of just created the perfect environment for something like this to really happen to me.
Yeah. Well, you've got people that you could relate to, and if I can project some of my own experience growing up in the civil rights movement in the South in the 50s and 60s, I know when the movie To Kill a Mockingbird came out, I was like, oh my gosh, there are other people like us out there.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody's a racist, horrible bigot. My father, who was a lawyer, he's just like Atticus Finch, which probably means nothing to you, but it was it's a big book. An important book, To Kill a Mockingbird. And then my parents took me to see that in the theaters, and it was what I call it gave me hope.
Yeah.
That things were going to be different in the future. And why would they make this movie if we're not people like us out there?
Right. And that's kind of what and I'm going to, again, use the word ideology, even though I know some people might not agree with that term. But for me, that's what it was almost like, kind of did for me. I often say, it almost gave me like a false promise of hope, because it, of course, ended up having its consequences and stuff. But,
right.
It was like this light at the end of the tunnel for me, because, of course, I viewed being gay as sinful. And I also had this, growing attraction to males. And of course, my own interests and my personality was not changing. Like, I could try to act a certain way, but if it's just not authentic, and I just don't do a good job at it, so, this idea that I could just change, like transition, and that there were hardly any consequences to it physically or psychologically, and I would just be able to disappear into society, was a very attractive idea to me, because it would fit within the heteronormative values that I was raised to believe in. And I also had a tutor at the time that was the only gay person I'd ever known, and she was started on testosterone at the same clinic. That's actually how I got a referral to this clinic, because this clinic was a 4-hour drive away from us, so it was an 8-hour turnaround. And so I think it was that combination of growing up in that background, and then this ideology presenting a way out of what I perceived to be like a miserable life, is like a gay person that would be very visible and not very accepted.
So it's a miserable life, but also a sinful one.
Yeah, it was very
where you were at the time.
Yeah. And then we'll come back to touch on that later, because that comes up again and again. At least in the beginning part of my transition. Of course, I eventually, my worldview changed, but this played a huge part in the beginning of my transition. Let's see. I was on question 4. I feel unhappy because I have a male body. Question 5 is the idea that I will always be a boy gives me a sinking feeling. And I checked agree completely, because it did at the time. And after this conversation with the therapist, I was terrified of what my future would look like as a male, because I was literally told that, with with my mannerisms and just the way that I am, she perceived it to be a feminine essence, and gay men are usually attracted like attracts like for them. That's sort of like that wasn't her exact words, but that was the idea that I had received from that conversation. Like for gay people, it's like
So,
attracts like.
yeah, so you're saying, if I understand you, that on top of everything else, she was conveying to you the idea that a gay man, even if it were not sinful and even if it were not a miserable future, is not going to be attracted to you.
Yeah, well, her words were more along the lines of, gay men want men, because she was implying that like I didn't have that energy.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Yeah. What's a feminine essence? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, again, what kind of phrase is that?
I don't know, but it made so much sense to me at the time because, of course I was bullied my whole life over, acting like a girl or talking like a girl or walking like a girl or, so when you have that conditioning and then they use that language, it like in your child mind, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's silly to think about now that I look back on it. But yeah, so because of that conversation, I checked off completely agree, because I did start to develop this like sinking feeling and this, massive fear of what my life would be like if I matured as a male, because they're like, it'll make your life harder. And if you develop these features, it's mostly irreversible. That was a huge thing that they were communicating too, is that testosterone is so much more aggressive than estrogen. So even if I got all the surgeries, they were like, it won't all be reversible. So they like really put this fear in my mind of what my natural development would do to my body, which was just such a frightening experience to live through at that age. It just put me at such odds. It put me more at odds with my body than I was going into this. Absolutely. Question 6 was, I hate myself because I'm a boy. And I checked off neutral because I didn't know how to answer that, because for me, it wasn't necessarily the fact of like maleness, even though it was, going towards that route. It was much more appearance oriented and finding acceptance and wanting to know that I could find like a love someday and things along that lines. I just wanted like a normal life with somebody. And they really presented to me like I needed to do this in order to find that. It's insane. Question 7 was, I feel uncomfortable behaving like a boy always and everywhere. This one I checked agree completely, because that was a true statement for me. My mom dressed me as a boy growing up, and I was a small child, so it was what it was. But there were always moments where I would see people and be like, oh, I like her dress, or, oh, I like your nails, or, oh, I wish I could do that. You know what I mean? So it was very much, I was at odds with my, male social role, but that was like a social role, versus this ideology or this care model takes these, when you feel at odds with your social role, and then they take that into a route and solve that with physical changes. So it took the social aspect and made it all about the physical. And as a kid, it was impossible for me to really differentiate between the two, because I had no life experience, or maturity.
You have no life experience. You're not mature. Kids don't know from one minute to the next. I mean,
my mind changed all the time. I couldn't even decide what I wanted for lunch then.
For real.
Much less anything else.
I know.
Yet still,
I
question
know
8
my older daughter came in one day, and she had always loved my cooking with all the meat in it. And she's like, overnight, she's like, I can't eat this. I'm a vegetarian. What are you talking about? What do you mean, you asked me to make this 2 days ago. You asked me to make this, and today you cannot. You simply cannot eat it.
Right.
Sorry, it's just about what you're saying about you don't know from 1 minute to the next what you
Yeah.
want.
I mean, exactly. You never do when you're that young. You don't have the life experience or the maturity to really understand. And even then, like, I had a difficult time even conceptualizing of myself over the next like 5 years, much less the next, like the rest of my life, which, this kind of care is when they start you that young, the whole intention is that you will be in this system for the rest of your life. Because they kind of make like a long-term like plan for you, essentially. Question 8 was only as a girl my life would be living, of which, when my life would only be worth living, excuse my misspeak there. Of which I checked off agree completely because I had already had this conversation with the gender therapist. I filled this checklist out after my conversation with her. So she talked to me for like over an hour without my mom before she had me fill this out. So I already had this long conversation with her about how life would not work out for me as a man. And I needed to transition if I ever want a normal life. So of course I would agree completely that my life would only be worth living as a girl because I had these I don't even want to call them misconceptions. I just am going to say I was so misled in that appointment.
Well,
9 was
again, you've got something you want from her, and she's got something she does for her, which is to provide those letters. It's really almost, again, like you said, I'm not a lawyer either, but it's almost a conflict of interest.
Yeah. And it was almost,
letter.
To some extent, I wanted something, but to another extent, like the whole idea and my tutor referring us there was, my tutor was like, I can't tell you if you are really trans or not, because there was this idea at the time, it was less about an identity thing, even though like that language was used, like we still had the term gender identity, but the idea was that it was like had a biological basis.
Right.
So it was like, I'm going to refer you to these professionals because they should give you months and months of therapy to be able to sort out if this is really right for you or not. And they'll be able to help you either way. And that was just not at all what they did. Instead, it was, we're only going to affirm everything you're insecure about, tell you that this path is completely safe and has been done for decades with great success.
So thank you for that correction, because I think I've heard you say that was your mother's interest as well, is that they were going to help you figure this out.
Yes. And that was very much my mindset going in. Mine was much more simplistic because I was a kid and I was dealing with a lot of distress. But it wasn't like an all or nothing kind of thing, yet. That wasn't until after I had already spoken to this therapist and she confirmed and exacerbated all of my worries around this stuff. So I often describe it as in, if I already had like a dysphoria or like a body dysmorphia or something like that, this conversation had taken that and that internalized homophobia and was like pouring gasoline on it. So it was like, I came in there with an inkling of something. She affirmed, supported, and elaborated it. So then my problem went from like this big to like this big. And that's where I was getting this mindset that my life would only be worth living if I avoided these changes of like male puberty, because they were communicating to me how this would ruin my appearance and I would have a much more difficult time in life. But it was okay because they were going to help me avoid all of that. It's really twisted in a way, or that's how I feel, and for my experience looking back. 9 was, and this is where we'll get more into like the discussion of like the stage of puberty I was at as we progress through these remaining 4 questions. 9 was just a simple one. It was just like, do you dislike standing in a urinating position? And I was like, yeah, because I think that's gross and I always have. Anyways, that That has nothing to do with gender, really. 10 is I am dissatisfied with my beard growth because it makes me look like a boy. And I checked agree completely and wrote next to it, I don't have any yet, and put a smiley face next to it. Because at this stage in my life, I didn't even have peach fuzz, quite frankly. You know, like the hair on my arms then, I still don't really have like hardly anything. But like even then, it was like almost nothing. I was a baby. You know, question 11 was I dislike having erections. I checked the same thing, agree completely, and wrote next to it, I don't have any yet. Because I wasn't in that mindset yet. I hadn't even come close to that. The other boys in my grade, you know, their voices were starting to change and stuff. And mine just hadn't yet. You know, it's gotten a little bit deeper since I've started detransitioning, actually, because I've been off hormones for over 2 years. But before that, like I didn't have anything like that. You know, I remember feeling bad for some of my peers when their voices would start like breaking and stuff. And I'm like, oh, you poor thing. I get to avoid all of that, man. Like, you know, just like stupid teenager things. And then the last question.
Barely a teenager either. You're 13.
Right. Preteen things, you know.
Yeah,
The last question, question 12, was it would be better to not live than to live as a boy. Of which I checked off. Initially, I checked off disagree somewhat, but then I crossed it off and checked off neutral, because I was thinking about, you know, this question made me think about the concept of death, which was quite a frightening thought to be thinking about then, and I couldn't really conceive of it. So I checked off disagree somewhat because I was like, oh, well, you know, like I don't want to die, you know, but then at the same time, the conversations I had with this gender therapist, and from what I was seeing, you know, the people online, my role models online, and how hard they talked about their lives were growing up gay and effeminate and stuff like that, I was like, well, maybe my life would, you know, these people seem to be telling me the truth. And at the time, I felt like this therapist had my best interest at heart. So I was very conflicted and ended up just checking off neutral, because in some ways I agreed, in some ways I disagreed. And they never asked me about it. You know, this checklist never came back up in my care, because from this appointment, I got the referral to an endocrinologist. And from that appointment, I was started on testosterone blockers and eventually hormones at the age of 13.
Yeah. Let's switch to, was it, okay, so you've mentioned the endocrinologist. Was this Dr. Sack?
This was not Dr. Sack. Dr. Sack was a urologist I had seen for a medical problem later on, after I'd started officially puberty blockers. Sack was the professor of urology at this hospital at the time, but the doctor I had seen was the professor of endocrinology and disorders of sex development at this hospital. He was also the head of the comprehensive gender services program. And the social worker I saw was actually the program manager as well.
Okay. There are a couple of things I really want us to hit. And we've been going an hour now. So maybe I'd like for you to talk about Dr. Sack.
Okay. Do you want me to get into that now, or?
Well, I'd like to talk about that, and I'd like to talk about Skermeti.
Okay.
And then, Genspect a little bit, and I'm curious because one of the things I talked about before is the Southern Poverty Law Center has put it on a hate watch. So
yeah,
I think that's going to be a lot to cover. Yeah, unless there's something you think is more important. But I it just, talking with you and hear listening to your podcast and reading so forth, I'm just like just like anything that could happen did happen, and the one paying the price is you and your mom.
Yeah.
So tell us about Dr. Sack.
So Dr. Sack, I was referred to see as I was, so after I was put on puberty blockers, I was put on a puberty blocker officially after I turned 14 because spironolactone was not working well with my body. I was having like flank pain and urinary incontinence and dizzy spells. And then I was put on puberty blockers because it was considered like safer. And it had a horrible effects on my body that I've discussed elsewhere. I ended up developing urinary incontinence and hematuria from that, of which I got a referral at one point to see Dr. Sack about, who, in my record, he didn't record anything about his conversation with my mom and I, and chalked it up to social dysfunctional voiding, which, according to my research, is essentially like I was wetting myself because of a social reason. Not that I just had incontinence. And they had also documented that my hematuria had resolved itself, which it had not presently. I was still having episodes of that. And I didn't discover all these falsifications until about January 25, when I finally obtained all of my records. But Sack had falsified some of my records, and he was so rude to us. My mom and I never ended up going back. He wanted to imply that my incontinence was because I was holding in urine because I wasn't using female restrooms, of which I had not expressed any interest in. In fact, I was opposed to it because it made me feel more insecure. It made me feel uncomfortable. It made me feel uncomfortable because it made other people uncomfortable, and it just made me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And he and my endocrinologist did not respect that. And when I say that, my endocrinologist was friendly to my face about it, but he didn't ever record that discomfort that I had. And he later on ended up sending a letter to my school pushing them for me to use female restrooms. But anyways, Dr. Sack, I found out earlier this year, was recently arrested for multiple counts of possession of child abuse material, which is, of course, horrific. But it stood out to me given some of the elements of the treatment that I had received at this hospital, such as my mom and I being sent to that store after my first appointments with the doctor.
And that store is fill in a blank on that.
Yeah, so the store.
The whole thing, but just.
Well, so we were sent to the store initially. It wasn't described to us what the store was exactly. We were just told it was a store that supports trans people. And the idea is my doctors wanted me to have like articles of clothing that would make me look more feminine physically before I had time to develop the traits. So we were sent to the shop because we thought we were going to get like bra stuffers, essentially, was what we were under the impression of, which I know sounds weird given the fact that I'm a man. But, at the age that I was, my friends were doing stuff like that. That was like the stuff part of that age group. So it didn't stand out much beyond the fact that I was male and this was a treatment recommendation. So we went to the store and it was just like this indiscreet purple building. We were given like the gender therapist card that had like a little sticky note on the back that we were to present to the owner to be given access. And when we got there, like a female employee came forward, looked very confused, went to the back, got this owner who came out, who was a cross-dresser, because it's a cross-dressing store. And I don't want to like insult this person because I don't know their situation, but I'm just saying the fact of the matter, because he came out in like full garb, and seemed polite, so I'm not saying that this person was like coming out or anything. Like they were polite. He took the card, looked it over, took the sticky note, kind of crumpled it up. My mom helped put out her hand for the card, and he just kind of handed it back like, It just looked like on instinct, which I'm glad she did because I've kept it in my file all these years.
Well,
But
it's a curious place to send a child.
yeah, well, when we got in there, you know, when you first walk in, it's just like wigs and like shoes and like blouses and like very normal stuff. There was like an area where it had like hip pads. That was like something that they wanted me to get, which is essentially like underwear that just has like this like foam padding in it. And then we were being led to the area where they had like what we thought were going to be like bra stuffers. I get nervous talking about it, so excuse me getting like the hiccups. I do that when I get nervous.
If you want to move on, we can move on.
Oh no, I've already talked. It's already been put out there publicly, so I don't mind. You know, somebody's got to talk about it. And so we were led past all of these wigs and shoes and like these like more normal areas, and then we turn a corner and it was like all sex toys. Like, I mean, they had like cases with like dildos. There was like bondage gear. I saw one thing that was like a full bodysuit of like a nude woman, like a silicone bodysuit. And I asked like, well, what is that? And the owner was like, oh, that's for people when they have like bottom dysphoria, but they can't afford the surgery. So they wear that so they don't have to look at their stuff going to the bathroom. You know, things like that, which of course now
place and what kind of a person, what kind of an institution would send a 13-year-old boy into a place like that?
I mean, do you want me to name them? Because I will.
If you're not afraid to, sure, go ahead.
I mean, it's already out there publicly, and quite frankly, people can find it through my stuff. But it was Children's Mott's Hospital associated with the University of Michigan. So a pretty big hospital chain, you know, and
it's crazy. My mind boggles with all of this. You know, I mean, I've been around the block a few times. I've been on this planet for decades and decades, and I'm shocked. I'm just shocked as to what people will do, telling themselves, A, that a child can consent to this, and B, that this is something they don't think is perverse.
Yeah, well, the feeling that I had gotten was that these people would probably view themselves as like, maybe they viewed themselves as like sex positive. So maybe they didn't think about it being perverse. But then as I say that, there's a huge part of me that also feels like, well, I mean, come on. You know,
even the fact that you have,
and I've never gotten clarity on that.
Even the fact that you have some difficulty speaking about it, you know, it's telling, because you're not hesitant to talk about these things.
It was very jarring, the experience. And I should say, when they brought us around to what we thought were going to be bra stuffers, they weren't. They ended up being realistic, like breast forms. So they had like it was like silicone or cyber skin. It had like realistic, like, not to be vulgar, but like realistic, like nipples and everything on it.
Yeah.
And it was so weird. They found a size that would have like fit my 13-year-old body at the time, like a cup or whatever. And it was just a very uncomfortable experience. And there were also female employees that were kind of like around, because my mom it was obvious that she looked like distress. And there were other employees that kind of like came around, were like almost trying to soothe us and like normalize the experience. So it was just a very strange experience. And I never wore the stuff. I should just put that out there. We went home and threw it away. Like, I was so uncomfortable with this experience, because it felt almost like, I don't know, it just felt weird. And it was not, it wouldn't have helped me. And it never came up in my treatment after this, by the way. My doctors never asked, are you wearing this stuff? How does this make you feel? Or anything like that. They never brought it up again.
I know one of the things that Buck Angel has talked about is how is how different what he went through 30 or 40 years ago and what kids are going through now. You know, he has said, and I'm coming around to a point, that he had to go through years and years and years of therapy. And then one of the things that he was to do was to live as a man before he actually transitioned. So, I mean, but it's one thing if you're 40 years old
Yeah.
and you've been through years of therapy and you really talk to people and you've really tried to think it through. That's one thing. And that would be part of making that decision, would be living as the opposite sex for a period of time and seeing, but not when you're 13.
Exactly.
No, not something it never occurred to you. You know,
well, and this is a discussion I often have, because I have a lot of friends in my real life. You know, some of us were medicalized at the same age, and you know, we have our conclusions about it or whatever. But a lot of them went through this as adults, and what they went through and their treatment protocol was completely different than like what I went through. Where like I have a friend in real life who is very dear to me. And went through this as an adult, and went through that process where, you know, she had to dress as a woman for so many months, and it was like this whole it ended up being like a couple year process to actually get through everything. So she didn't understand when I start talking about my experience, and she's like, whoa, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, I hate to break it to you, but you know, our experiences were different. For me, it was much more fast-tracked, so much more fast-tracked. There was no room for doubt. There was no time for questioning.
You've gotten a letter after one appointment.
One appointment. Yeah,
I mean, talk about a difference between a process that took years.
Yeah.
And one that you're started down that track from day one with a professional.
Yeah, because for my friend, I don't think my friend was started on hormones until like a year and a half to 2 years into this process. Like they had to dress and live that way for so long, you know, go out in the world that way, and it was like this whole thing. And I know it's not exactly that case anymore because the standards of care have changed over time. But that was how this person's clinicians had treated them, and that was just completely different than what I went through, or what my other friends who were transitioned as minors at other hospitals went through. Our process was, most of us only had one appointment, 1 or 2 appointments. You know, I have a friend that had a few, but we were very fast tracked, and there was no time for doubt. We were always being told how limited our time was to make a decision. You know, it was very distressing. and I laugh mostly out of shock and to cope, but it was a very distressing, fast-tracked experience for sure, compared to what I've heard the adults go through.
Yeah. Okay, so Dr. whatever his name is.
His name was Brian Sack.
Brian Sack. So as I understand it, he was arrested. I think you've already said this, for possession, and he was a urologist.
He was the professor of urology.
A professor of urology in a children's hospital, or for
a children's hospital, the most prestigious one in my state.
And he was arrested for possession of child pornography, and he is now awaiting trial, I believe.
Yeah, he is.
And I believe he was fired or dismissed or resigned upon being arrested.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head if he resigned or if he was fired, but he's no longer with, because he was working with the university and with another hospital, and he no longer works with either of them. So I will say that he's no longer affiliated with them since since he was caught with stuff.
And I want to emphasize too that people are innocent until they're proven guilty in a court of law.
Yeah.
But
he did falsify my record too, so I'm just
there
saying,
you go.
like,
Witness, I don't know.
My personal opinion, and I'll say this is my personal opinion based off of, his part in my treatment and how we reported things. Whether or not he's proven innocent on other things,
Yeah.
I still don't think he's a very upstanding individual.
You probably wouldn't want to go to him. So we have a comment from a good friend of mine who's been tuning in regularly, and she says, in my mind, at 13, that is child sexual abuse. I think she's referring to everything we've been talking about.
Oh, it should be.
Yeah, oh gosh. So let's move on, if you want to Skermeti. And the thing about Skermeti is there's a big difference between what people who are trans advocates or trans activists,
Mm-hmm.
and even like the little blurbs when you Google it, what pops up is not what Skermeti actually decided. And the case was U.S. v. Skermeti. And it had to do with the ban in Tennessee on providing surgeries or hormones to minors.
Yeah.
And there is an exception. There's an exception for minors who may puberty blockers or who have some specified need.
Yes.
So, but when you read about it, what you read is Skermeti decided that there will be no medical help given to minors who say they're trans, which makes it sound like if you're trans, we're not going to treat you for a brain tumor. We're not going to set your broken arm. And this is just not accurate. And I bring this up because you were not one of the original, what would it be? A defendant, or you?
I wasn't a plaintiff in it, no.
Yeah, but you submitted.
I ended up submitting a statement later on. I ended up submitting a statement later on. Sorry, there's some sound interference on my end. So
we're coming and going. So yeah, you've got it, and I'll put it in the show notes, but you have a sworn statement. A sworn statement basically saying you were I don't know how a lawyer would say it, but that you were not opposed to the Tennessee ban, that you were in favor of that ban because of the things that happened to you.
Yes, exactly. And because
take that out, and it is a sworn statement, which means you could be charged with perjury if they were to look into it, which it's a sworn statement. So I think anybody who's interested, people really need to know what Skermeti did and did not say, and that there are exceptions, and that you submitted a sworn statement in favor of the Tennessee ban because of what happened to you.
Yeah, I had submitted it with someone who was helping me out at the time to obtain my medical records, because around then I was just beginning my detransition. I had officially Well, I was told to go off hormones in December of 23, but I was still under the impression that I had this brain condition causing it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until March of 2024 that I officially was like, with the release of the WPATH files and all this other information I was finding, that I had officially made the decision to like not go back to that path. So I was getting some help to obtain my medical records, and of course, the Scrimeti case was going on at the time. And reading into this case with this person, I did want to help out in a way, and this we did obtain some of my records to review through, although it was an ongoing battle for me to obtain all of my information. We had enough to investigate my case, because they usually do that before you submit in a sworn statement like this, especially if you're doing it like, you know, with somebody else. They will investigate, just because, as you said, you know, it's a crime to submit false information into a court, especially the Supreme Court. And yeah, you know, my statement, anyone is welcome to read it. It just goes over my experience, how I was growing up, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit into how I got caught up in this, a little bit about my appointments with my doctors, them offering for me to preserve, they had offered for me to save sperm in my first appointment. You know, we put all of that in my statement, explaining why I would support a ban like that. Because as you said, with this ban, it doesn't ban medical care altogether. So like if you, as in your example, like if you have a brain tumor and you identify as trans, you're still able to get medical care. Like we don't want to bar everyone from it. And you know, in regards to puberty blockers, there were exceptions for like kids that have like precocious puberty, for example. You know, where this is like actually medically necessary. But it essentially would ban this stuff for like situations like mine, where it's all, you're being given these treatments based off of very subjective matters that clinicians may or may not be digging into. So I would support a ban like that, because given my experience, you know, of course, I know from my own experience, I wasn't mature enough to make these decisions, but also the physical harms that result from it are long lasting. You know, I went through my whole adolescence on different testosterone blockers and estrogen, and I had progesterone at one point for a few years, and the effects are going to be permanent on my body. Like it stunted my growth. Obviously, like my voice didn't change for a long time. So now that my voice is getting deeper, it actually is like a little sore as it's like changing. You know, I have like sexual dysfunction, which I had also included in with my statement. And it's unclear as to whether or not these will recover, or to what degree I might recover. You know, my doctors can't really give me an answer on that. So it's really all a big question mark. You know, it's very difficult, and I wouldn't want any other child going through it, just purely based off of that experience alone, you know, not even including the rest, like urinary incontinence, or, you know, growing breasts and then changing your mind and now you have breasts, you know, things of that nature. It's my view, and the view of some of those that support me, that children just are simply not capable of making these decisions. They're just
not capable of it. And I just want to emphasize too that I think people need to read these opinions, you know, and not just accept what the internet tells them, that this basically was, we hate trans people.
Yeah.
Conclusion, and we would just assume they die as help them. That's not what it is. You don't have to like it, but you need to know what it is.
A lot of people adopt this very extreme view that if you disagree with any of it, then that just means that you want the worst for everybody. And that's really not the case. Like where I'm coming from in all this is I care very deeply for this group of people. You know, obviously I'm a gender nonconforming person, and I was distressed with my social role at that age. So there was a time where I did kind of meet enough of the criteria to fall into that cohort and of people, and I don't want any ill to befall them is the whole reason that I oppose these practices, because, you know, even to take it further, like I never had surgery, but, you know, to argue from the perspective of like an activist that might be in support of this stuff, you know, if somebody transitions young with blockers and everything and they want to get surgery later, well, now that's going to be a more difficult surgery because they haven't developed to the point physically for that surgery to be accomplished in the proper way. You know what I mean? So even just from that perspective, even if this did benefit people in some ways, it's going to cause so many other issues in other ways that I don't feel like people who are in support of these interventions for kids, I don't feel like they consider all of these things.
Well, I don't think I mean, you've said it far better than I could. And I told you, you know, in 2017, I compiled and published a book called Rainbow in the Word. And I just accepted what I'd been told was that trans was just another form of gay or lesbian. And it's not. You know, so I mean, I've had to, we're all subject to believing these things that we're told. And if you hear it enough, it's what you think, and you don't really investigate it until something comes along that prompts you to investigate it, which is, you know, what I have done. And of course, what happened to you has, you know, obviously you've investigated it. But I'd like you to address, we use the word detransition, which makes it sound like you can just roll back the clock, you know, especially if you didn't have any surgeries. But even on that, I mean, Johanna Olson Kennedy infamously said that if a young girl has a double mastectomy when she's 13 or 14, if she wants breasts later on, she can just go get them, which is just baloney.
Well, and on the flip side of that, I have been told by doctors, not all of my doctors, but some of them have told me that if I ever want my stuff removed, or because I'm uncomfortable with it now, why don't I just go get them removed? And it's like, well, because now they're so developed, you can't see it under my sweater, but they're so developed, I would need my whole chest reconstructed because I have quite considerable breast development. So they would have to, you know, take out all these lobules and things that have developed and hypertrophied and like reshape everything. And, you know, I'd have to have essentially the same surgery that my female peers had, you know. It's not as simple as just going back.
Sorry, our audio is breaking up a little bit, but that opens, I mean, there's nothing that says that even if you did those things, as you've said, you still have a feminized face, your hips are wider than most boys would be, and there's just a limit to what you can undo, and all of those surgeries open you up to complications from the surgeries, which, I mean, so the bottom line is, you can stop the estrogen, but you can't really go back to where you were when you were.
Yeah.
Had you been a 12-year-old who just went through puberty.
Yeah, you can never fully go back. Even if they were to have just implemented blockers, you know, the growing evidence is that you can't get back time that has already passed, right? And many of these changes, especially with puberty, occur in developmental windows. So if you miss that developmental window, then you might get some changes, like, you know, I'm starting to get like bits of facial hair on my face and stuff like that. But I will never be able to go through all these same complete developmental changes that I would have if I was left alone as a teenager, because I've missed those developmental windows. And of course, for me, I also had, hormones included, which then is like a step further in causing all these other permanent changes. It's really not something you can go back from. I suppose the term detransitioner is helpful in that some people would identify themselves as X-trans, but I don't really relate to that myself, because for me, it wasn't so much of even though it was something that I suppose I did identify into, that wasn't really the framework that I had viewed it through. My endocrinologist, my therapist, had presented this theory to me that we commonly call the brain sex theory. So it was this idea that there was a hormonal imbalance in the womb that made my brain feminine, but my body masculine. So how I viewed this was through a biological framework that, well, this is really who I am. And that's why I need to transition, because you can't change your brain, which of course, is debatable. But you can change your body. So I don't really relate to the X-trans label so much, although I have seen that become, more popular. And it does describe some people's experience. For me, detransitioner would probably be the best descriptor, as for me, it was a cessation of actual transition. I just stopped moving forward with it, and I just stopped the hormones. I also like the term, I want to say real quick, I also like the term, and this is a term that we've used a lot within GenSpect, and that's harmed by medical transition. And because that's a much broader term, and it covers people like some of my very close friends in real life who still identify with that, but were harmed through some of the medical interventions.
And although it seems very clear to me, and I think a lot of people, that you were medically harmed, you are not going to be able, as far as you understand, to get justice in the courts because the statute of limitations has passed.
Yeah, and I've had mixed, receptions on that, because for some claims I'm out of the statute of limitations, like medical malpractice. Other claims, I've just not had very good experience consulting people, because there are people out there who might think that I'm still in the ideology some way because of my mannerisms or my presentation, or the fact that I express myself in certain ways, like in regards to painting my nails and stuff like that. Not everyone thinks that would make me a very good plaintiff as well. I don't want to specify, because I think that everyone is still doing really good work out there. But, there's a lot of complex reasons as to why I was not able to proceed with the case.
And I will tell you, as the wife of a retired lawyer and the daughter of another one, don't waste a minute of your life, in a courtroom if you can at all help it. It's expensive, it's emotionally draining, and you can lose. So I'm not offering you advice. I'm just saying, I'm affirming that just because you may not be able to do it, it's not like you're being robbed of anything necessarily.
Well, and there are other ways for justice to happen that plays a huge part into how I've been able to move forward with my advocacy, because there are other ways for justice to come about, even if the wheels are slow to turn.
I agree.
It'll happen. So,
I mean, that's why I do this podcast.
Yeah.
I'm not suing anybody. I have no intention of suing anybody. Because I've been married to a lawyer for 15 years.
That a lawsuit is a miserable process.
So people talk about the standards of care, and they talk about WPATH. And I know that when we were talking, you touched on WPATH and what it is and is not. So if you want to say a word about that, and then we can talk about GenSpect and all that. I think people do need to know that when they're seeing WPATH, this professional association, and its standard of care is, you have a thought on that?
Yeah, so essentially WPATH, I had recognized the name because it was on some of the paperwork I had received from the hospital in relation to their standards of care. Because the clinic I went to was guided by it. And it played a part in my detransition when I saw the WPATH files. I had Michael Schellenberger talking about these files, which were these internal documents and videos and like recorded calls and such from within this organization. And WPATH stands for the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And they determine the standards of care that all of these clinics operate by. And when these documents came out, it was revealed to me not only were many of these doctors treating their patients with, I'm going to say some degree of disregard. And I'm going to give an example of that. There was a discussion within the files regarding patients' fertility. And one of the doctors was discussing when one of his patients had changed their mind. They hadn't preserved their fertility, and then they changed their mind later on. We're like, oh, I'm having issues now. I found a partner and I would like, to have that. And he was like, oh, so the dog isn't doing it for you anymore. And just, things like that in the files, that the disregard and the casual callousness really stood out to me, and it reminded me of the latter years of the care with my original providers that had done this to me. And I had also learned through these files that this association is not necessarily a medical organization in and of itself either. It's entirely an advocacy organization. It's an activist organization. Anyone can be a part of this organization. You just have to pay a fee to be a part of it. It's not strictly limited to doctors. It's not like the Endocrine Society or any of these other organizations who, of course, seem to have followed this, I guess what they call the chain of trust, and just put forward and recommended these standards without really, it seems, really doing much research into this organization itself. So it's really tragic. I would highly recommend anybody listening or watching this when it later comes out recording. I would highly recommend anyone, no matter which side you come on. Like if you're coming, not in support of this stuff, or if you are in support of these procedures, I highly recommend going and reading through the WPATH files. There are parts in it that are somewhat horrific, but it's necessary that this information gets out there because it's
I agree.
pretty bad.
I've read a good bit of it, and it's just, I don't know. I'm trying to think in the Fox-Varian case lawsuit. She sued her psychiatrist and her plastic surgeon, and they found in her favor. And I think one of the reasons was that one or both of the physicians did not hold to even the accepted standards of care put out, I believe, by WPATH.
That was exactly why Fox Variants case won. And it was the psychiatrist, I believe, that did not fully, or was it a psychiatrist or psychologist? I don't remember off the top of my head. But it was the mental health professional that was held mostly liable in that for not fully following the standards of care, which was part of the argument I wanted to make for myself in my own case. Because I mean, even just reading through my questions earlier and my responses, there's a lot in there that needed to be delved into. And of course, there were further situations like me being sent to a sex store and such that are not a part of the WPATH standards of care at all. I've tried to raise this to multiple people, but of course, I haven't had any luck, which is what it is. But that seems to be the path to cases right now. So many of these doctors kind of went off took something that was maybe not fully reliable, and then they went their own direction with it and might have taken it a step further as well. It's a really horrific medical scandal all around.
Oh my goodness, it's a medical scandal. It is a journalistic scandal. It's on those 2 points at least. It's, to my mind, there's no other argument you can make. So, before we go, talk to us about GenSpect. And as I said, I want to ask you this question. Do you think that, as the Southern Poverty Law Center suggests, that GenSpect and the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine are hate groups?
No, that is, I'm going to say from my personal opinion, it's entirely bogus. I interpret that. They put that out there as essentially
fundraising. It's a
yeah.
fundraising technique. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just making me sick.
It's like I hesitate to say slander, but I'm gonna say my personal opinion is they put that out there as slander. Because GenSpect is not at all a conversion therapy organization. I had first become familiar with them when I was still somewhat within I still identified as trans. And in my associations with them, I had never experienced any kind of hatred or anything like that. It was entirely open. It was people that care very much about this group of people, especially adolescents that are distressed in this way. They're distressed about their bodies. They're distressed about their role in society. They're worried about their future. We care very, very much about this group of people, and we don't want any harm to come to them. And
I do want to interject that you are now part of GenSpect.
Yes, I am.
You're their ambassador.
I am. I'm their first ever ambassador, which is
awesome.
It is awesome. I've been very blessed to be backed by very, very kind people. They've been very kind to me, over time. I mean, they care we care very much about this group of people, and we just don't want any harm to befall this group. And, this medical scandal has been so horrific thus far. So many people have been harmed from all aspects of life that we've taken our stance on it, and we're trying to advocate for a non-medicalized approach to handling this gender-related distress. Especially when it comes to young people, because the harms are so much more when you enter in, especially into the medical field, but even as like in a social way, you're still reinforcing a lot of these negative feelings around your body and your gender. So we try to advocate for a deeper, more psychotherapeutic approach to handling this distress, delving more into why you started feeling this way, how you came into this, just to help people develop more understanding at the very least before they.
I have learned so much from Stella O'Malley, the founder of GenSpect, and from Sasha Ayad, her former co-host on a podcast called A Wider Lens, which I've looked into. When I do a deep dive, I do a deep dive. And I've looked into the people that have been on their shows and what they've had to say and so forth and so on. So what exactly is it that you do for GenSpect? Do they have you on the speaking circuit or what?
Yeah, so essentially I'm a speaker. I share my story. I help with some like research stuff on the side. I'm working on getting some articles and stuff published as well. Hopefully in the future, I'll be able to start my own podcast or show. We'll see. As we discussed earlier, I'm tech stupid. So it will, hopefully I figure out stuff on my end. But I'm getting my story out there, and they're helping me do that essentially, which has been very, very kind and very helpful. And I'm kind of, the perfect person to do it because I went through this at such a young age. I'm coming out of it on the other end. I'm very open and I'm very neutral about a lot of things. I'm pretty well, I'm not very politically involved or anything like that. I really care for this group of people, and I don't want anyone to go through the same harm that I went through. And I don't want, predatory practitioners like my doctors were to be treating this group of people at all, because clearly not all of these doctors have their patients' best interests at heart. So that plays a huge part in fueling me to speak out. And GenSpect has been kind enough to give me a platform and help get my voice out there, get my story out there. And, hopefully, together we can help at least present a more informed approach to handling these issues than the current model presents,
Right. Once you've got media captured, and once you have even activism like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which you're too young probably and too far up in Michigan to know much about it.
I'm going to be honest. With the Southern Poverty Law Center, I didn't hear about it until I heard that they designated us as a hate group. And I was like, what?
Well, and the thing is, this is like the Southern Poverty Law Center is right up there with the ACLU as being like a blue ribbon activist organization, but as the name indicates, lawyers acting on behalf of poor people in courtroom settings. And what they have slid into is this hate watch, and they've gotten people all concerned about these hundreds of thousands of cells all over the country of white supremacists and bigots and converting. And then they named GenSpect and the Society for Evidence. It's just, to me, it was like the final grift. They've been offshoring money, and
I was about to say, aren't they on trial right now too? The Southern Poverty Law Center for taking money from people.
Right. They have been charged with money laundering, bank fraud, and a couple of other related.
Yeah.
They're not on trial for being grifters, but
no, but really, definitionally,
I can say they've turned into grifters, bank fraud and wire fraud.
That kind of is what a grifter is. A grifter, by definition, is someone who swindles money. So if that's if that's what they were doing, then that is a grifter, and that's not,
we stopped giving money to them maybe 10 years ago because I was like, what is this emphasis on hate groups? Why are they not in there defending poor people in courtrooms?
Yes.
And then being part of a law community in Alabama, which is where the SPLC is located. And I had relied on them so much in my documentary, The Second Cooler, that it just pissed me off. It pissed me off that so many people believed in them, and they did do some stellar work, but they've gone off the rails.
Yeah, they really have.
And it fits into what we're talking about with you, because your emphasis is on the medical scandal, which it clearly is, but it's been helped along by this blue ribbon activist organization. It's been helped along by journalists and media people who don't bother to read the Scarmetti decision before they, So, and they're not listening to people like you. If you don't know, you clearly, you come across as honest, not pulling any punches, of being very fair-minded, and you've been through the ringer.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing. That's where I think it's so crazy that people will designate groups like GenSpect as like a hate group, because we're so far from it. Like we would hate if anyone felt any kind of way from that. And so many people, of course, will say that they do, because then they go on and they Google us and things like this
And
other
then the
drug
things
loss
have
center,
popped up.
comes up. But I mean, if you, for anyone that's actually interacted with us, I mean, we really try our best to be fair to everyone. I mean, regardless of where you come from in life or, you know, how you identify, it's not about that. It's really just about addressing this medical scandal and trying to make sure that people have the best healthcare available. You know, there's just this ongoing debate in the culture right now as to how we should proceed with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Well, we're coming up on 2 hours.
okay.
And I do want to thank you. You have an open invitation to come back any time for any reason and talk with us. Please convey my warmest regards to the people at GenSpect. I mean, really, my warmest regards for them. And please give your mom a hug for me. And yeah, I want her to come on too, because she has a point of view as a parent.
Yes, and she did express some interest in it. She got called into a meeting today, so that's why I was able to use her office because she had to head out. So, but in the future, I will put you guys in communication, and we'll try to do something like that. And I would love to come back on again. You know,
please do.
Yeah. So,
yeah, the latch key will be out for you both, as we say, if you know what that means.
I think so. I think
it means in the door there's a little hole, and you put the key through the little hole on a string so it hangs outside, so that somebody who comes up can get the key and unlock the door and come in. So the latch key will be out for you and your mom, Melissa.
Well, thank you very much.
Come on in.
Yeah, we'll do this again in the future. I like this discussion, so we'll do this again.
Very, very good. Okay, well, keep us posted, and we'll talk to you later.
Perfect. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.